Well, there seems to be a lot of bills in the ledge that are on the bubble and a budget that is being discussed as well. So with our weekly discussion on what's going on and what might go on, Representative Aaron Johanson joins us live, and so can you. Remember, not by email, though, during this segment, just by telephone. So if you'd like to drop in or butt in to any part of the conversation today, you know what to do. 296-5467. I find it ironic, Aaron, that the ledge actually meets on April Fool's Day because, I mean, the temptation is so wide open, right?
Yes.
Good morning. How you
Certainly
doing?
lends itself to a lot of jokes, doesn't it?
You mentioned to me off the air that we are at another significant crossroads with some things. And the biggest thing, of course, that comes to mind, and tell us sort of how the semantics or how this works, is the budget. What's the latest you can tell us?
Sure. Well, the budget has actually morphed significantly based on what the Senate has done. Now, sometimes what the Senate will tell you is that they don't have enough time to work on it right when the House just passes it over, so they're working on it in parallel. And, it's indicative of the fact that the two chambers maintain somewhat separate mentalities and a separate way of doing things. And so the House passed what I believe to be a fairly fiscally conservative budget in terms of what the governor asked for and what we reduced, which was by $600 million, and took some pretty hard stances on regularly funded but unfilled vacancies, making the executive branch justify why those have been unfilled for so long and whether it's really a need. What the Senate has done is they've come back and virtually granted many, or acceded to, I should say, many of the governor's requests for increased spending. Correct.
Now that being said, I'm wondering if there's an explanation. I mean, the simplest that I've used in the past, and we have never talked about this. I'd be interested in your thoughts. Is that there are 51 senators, and there are a lot more representatives. So that I think that the representatives bring a more accurate picture of what's in the trenches, what's needed. And so, therefore, is it any wonder that there would be a difference of opinion in the two bodies with regards to a budget?
You know what I think it's most indicative of is that there are 76 legislators. That includes the representatives and the senators, and that means 76 egos. So it might be more ego and personality driven.
Well,
but people do have different perspectives.
Isn't it true? I mean, I saw this morning a big deal being made of Senator Schatz's campaign. And I'm thinking, well, what about doing the job? I mean, he's brand new at it. Now we're talking about a campaign, and the governor's talking about consistency, and we're talking about all of this stuff. Isn't it hard sometimes to think about, wait a minute, why are we talking about a campaign, an election that's way over there when we got pressing needs right here, right now?
And the temptation, I think, in the news, especially as we move into this infotainment kind of era, is...
That's a great word, by the way. I'm going to write that down. Infotainment.
Yeah, people want to be entertained, and so rather than, and there have been, to the news media's credit, there have been some stories about the budget, but it's certainly not a common household discussion like it should be, considering that it funds the entire.
Isn't it the very thread of our daily activity is what the budget says and doesn't say?
That is correct, and what it also ends up being indicative of is what our cost of living is going to be like and our subsequent quality of life. So, in order to fund some of what the Senate wants and what we didn't originally put into the House budget, it takes away a lot of our margins. That swirling away for winter in case something bad happens in the economy is less of a possibility if we adopt the Senate position, because it calls for hundreds of millions of dollars more spending than the House would have.
It's sort of ironic in many ways that this is April Fool's Day because, as I mentioned in the introduction, April is Tsunami Awareness Month, and we all know that what devastation tsunami brings and hurricanes bring. And we talk about these rainy day funds, which we've pretty much emptied over the years. Does it mean that isn't a tsunami of debt just as serious as a tsunami of water?
Oh, certainly.
That's what we're looking at here.
When you look at our unfunded liabilities, I mean, both the employee retirement system and the employee union trust fund, which is the healthcare benefits, we've got a lot of unfunded liabilities in the billions that weigh down our bond rating, which means whenever we go out to build, a highway or a road or some public infrastructure project, and we go out to float bonds in order to finance that, if our bond rating is not good, less people will buy those bonds to finance those public works projects. So it's all tied together, and I think that's that's one thing that I probably didn't have the greatest grasp of before being in the legislature, because it's not something that's talked about in
it
the
isn't.
media
You know
at
what?
all.
It isn't, and primarily because, to be
Except
honest,
on your show.
Yeah, no. But I mean, even on my show, to be honest, we're so worried about the day-to-day activities of what's going on with shootings and stabbings and muggings and ID theft and everything else that sometimes something that doesn't pop up and say, fix me right now, like the budget, it just escapes coverage.
Well, I'll give you two prime examples that I think more people should know about, but often don't. On the budget, people wonder, why does it keep changing, and how is it based? And that's because so much of it is based on projections. So to be fair to the Senate, one of the reasons they increased spending and made it more like the comport with the governor's ideas is because they would say, well, the economic forecasts are higher based on the Council of Revenue's projections, which the House
is so spooky.
It if you believe the forecasters, then sure, everything is great. But forecasts are just that. They're forecasts.
Yep.
They're not actual revenue. And that's sometimes when all of a sudden we go from great forecasts, great budget with a lot of good stuff, and then all of a sudden the actual revenue is down because something happens in the macroeconomic
Yeah, it's
picture.
somewhere else. Sure.
People wonder, why all of a sudden are we having to make these cuts, and why are they these drastic scale backs in services?
Well, isn't the sequestration exercise a prima facie example of just that? We failed to provide, and now there's a mandatory cut. And things like, here's the thing: how much danger do you see? There's some that are saying, hey, look, the conservatives and the Republicans here in Hawaii, they're it's the boy that cries wolf. Everything is great. Look at the Council of Revenues. Look at spending is up, occupancy is up. Come on, stop us.
Yeah, I think the biggest danger to Hawaii is that aside from military spending, we're largely discretionary spending oriented in terms of the nature of our economy. So, we're subject to everything that happens around the world, because if tourists don't have the money to travel, or for some reason they're scared to travel because there's global
It only takes
instability.
one incident.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it could be something as simple as, if all of a sudden there were some kind of outbreak, even just of bugs in hotels, and people started to say, you know what, we don't think Hawaii is as great as it is, then all of a sudden we start to lose our cash cow. So that's particularly why military spending and other more stable sources of money are really important to our economic diversification, which is what makes sequestration all the scarier.
I can tell you one thing before we go to our first break. I don't know if you had a chance to look at this, but right now, North Korea is doing some unbelievable posturing. And whether you just want to just say, well, they're doing this for their own people, for their own good. How little of a change would it take in a story to have a bunch of people say, you know what, I don't think we're going to go to Hawaii right now because North Korea is about to nuke them. So why would we want to go there?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that not a contrived, but a very real consideration that we got to make?
It is, and that's why when your economy is predicated on global stability and global prosperity, in order to have that discretionary income, we end up having to worry about a whole lot of things. We're less insulated as a state economy than some others that, if it's just mining or it's just agriculture or it's a lot of those domestic things that are within their control, they can keep their economy moving.
Well, you see, don't we have also an added pressure in that a lot of these economic downturns are based on national figures like, gross national product and unemployment, all of these things. And you can see trends where Hawaii, one incident can just shut the water off. I mean, the faucet can get turned off in a day.
Yeah. You could have a strike and not have toilet paper here.
Jeez, and it's happened
like
before.
You just
Is it
never know.
happening again? Who knows? Hey, more coming up, including your opportunity to join us. Some of the things we're going to talk about with Rep. Johanson this morning are early education, which is still up there, and a lot of other things to do with spending, and the fact that he's going to describe to us a little bit more what this means now that the Senate has come up with a version of the budget. 17 minutes after the hour, 296-KHNR. That's the only way you can join us. That's 296-5467.
More of the Mike Buck Show coming up on AM 690 KHNR.
Yep, and everybody's got to get footloose. Well, the one thing you don't want to be is footloose at the legislature, because right now things are underfoot and a bunch of stuff changing. And just before the break, we were talking to Rep. Johanson, and you can too, by the way. Try to stay on point, or even if not, let's talk about this session, though, at 296-5467. That's 296-KHNR. Maybe you should explain. The Senate was saying, you were saying off the air and on the air, I think, that the Senate's main concern was that they didn't have enough time to really review the budget in the period of time. But they seem to have done that. So their budget.
They are reviewing it in parallel with the House.
Yeah.
So some of their ideas were probably enshrined in their version before the House version even came out. But they do take a look at obviously the stance that the House took, and that's part of why what will happen is once they promulgate their official, their Senate version of the budget, which is HB 200. Then it'll go into conference, and the House and the Senate will work out their differences.
And that's the end. That's the end game, right? What's your feeling? I mean, obviously, we were talking before about what constitutes alarm, and the alarm is sometimes offset by the projected revenues, which may or may not take place, but that's what they're guessing at. It seems to me, in support of the Council of Revenues, that they've been in recent times a little more accurate than before. In other words, their forecasting tools are better. So what they're saying is can be counted on, but incidents notwithstanding.
Yeah, it's certainly a good gauge, and it's better than nothing. And I, not being a professional economist, am not going to quibble with their projections. I just hew more to the line of just being cautiously optimistic when it comes to our revenue.
In other words, knock on wood.
Right.
Okay, let's talk about a couple of specific things. I do know one thing that's coming up today, and there's been a lot of urge in the community to participate and let their feelings be known. The so-called PLDC. I know that's going to be discussed today. What's your thought on that? Is it with regards to it going forward?
Well, I think the decision making today on the House bill, which is 1133, is going to be in the Senate, and I think it's going to move. There's clearly a lot of support for repeal of the PLDC, and I think besides just sort of what people think about the environment, I think because there was so much to do with transparency and accountability and just community involvement and community say, there's a broad coalition of people who are largely suspect of the original PLDC. So I think there's a lot of traction and a lot of support for its repeal.
Don't you think, because I do, and not that I'm trying to make you think what I think, but don't you think that today we are a lot more responsive? And I think that the drill that we've gone through with the public outcry about transparency sends a clear message to somebody writing a bill. Hey, if you want something to work, we better all be able to take a look at it. Otherwise, we're going to squawk, because that's what's happened here.
Which is precisely what active democracy should be.
It's terrific.
I think, quite honestly, this is a good example of what active participation in government can engender. It can change things, and it can change the behavior at the legislature. But the less people interact, the less behavior will change, and sometimes things will just get passed and keep on moving.
Now, what about the caution that everybody's received about parts of that still being alive and well, and in other bills? I mean, obviously, the creation of the PLDC in the first place showed that there was a need to do some things. But rather than just clean it up, it's being thrown out the window.
Well, I think part of the reason that the PLDC as an entity is being largely abandoned is to be able to start afresh. And as you pointed out, I think the original idea from which the PLDC sprang was actually a good concept.
Pretty good idea,
It was good. How do we facilitate good quality economic development? That at its base, that was what the authors of the original PLDC were intending. Something that a lot of us want. And I think, sometimes...
But the side effects were, with some, particularly environmentalists and others, hey, wait a minute, you might be able to do this, but not without vetting it.
Yeah, well, it ended up coming out like sausage. Like many things at the legislature at the sausage-making factory.
Start with steak, ends up sausage.
Right, and
true.
so... but I think one bill that is not exactly the same as the PLDC, but trying to capture that spirit is now the PPPA, which has limited pilot projects, which would help to facilitate some development there, but largely in communities that have wanted it with ideas that are already existing. So many of the suspicious potential vehicles for a reincarnation of the PLDC are not necessarily live. There is another one that some people feel is akin to the PLDC, which is the 21st Century Schools Bill, and that it again depends on where you feel. Some people would say there's a lot of underutilized land that schools sit on, and to be able to utilize part of that land directly for infrastructure and school improvements, related to that development might have some potential.
I know that the hue and cry in the neighborhoods was Let's not make any long-term arrangements with the properties, because maybe when the economy gets better, we can expand to what their initial use is for. I'm kind of concerned that maybe what we used to think of property-wise is really been given. We took too much space in some areas for some schools where maybe it wasn't required. Maybe we don't need it, particularly, and this must be difficult for a legislator, and this is why a lot of us in the mainstream don't understand it. You people are having to look so far down the road. Mm-hmm. You're actually looking at when a school is not going to be utilized anymore, rather than we need it now. What about 40 years from now when the neighborhood grows up and there are no more kindergarten kids?
Mm-hmm. Right, and when everybody continues, the move to the west, and EVA-bound, and schools in towns start to lose populations, then what do we do? And it is a very difficult process, particularly for the DOE when they talk about school closures or land utilization. And I don't know that there's any perfect answer, and that's
well,
why
we have a comfort level, right, Aaron? I mean, take your own district for example. Mm-hmm. These schools in your neighborhood, everybody has this comfort zone of that's the school, that's our school, that's where my kids going, that's where their kids are going to go.
That's what we grew up with.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you find out, well, we're closing yours. Mm-hmm. Why?
Right.
Close somebody else's. Don't close ours. It's NIMBY.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean that's exactly how I'd feel with the 13 schools that are in my district.
Sure.
I wouldn't want the elementary that I grew up at closed. Now I do also understand that the counterpoint to that, and I'm lucky none of my 13 schools are underpopulated, so it's not something I'll have to confront soon. But I think every legislator sometimes has that awkward choice of, well, I understand that we might need the money diverted elsewhere, but it's important to our community.
I actually saw something the other day where Chicago's going through a similar problem, but they're looking at 100 schools having to be closed. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's these huge shifts. Our shifts are a little less huge because there's so many fewer of us here. Mm-hmm. But isn't it absolutely a fact that the population shift is out to your neck of the woods? I mean, that part of the island seems to be the only place where we can do, large developments and be within codes.
Yeah, definitely the leeward side, and the central plain is where a lot of the population is moving, and a lot of the open space for developments exist.
Representative Aaron Johanson's in the House. We will be able to take some of your calls in the segment right after the break, which is coming up. Tomorrow, April 2nd, the remaining 3 early learning bills are going to be looked at. And we'll come back. We'll find out. The House Finance Committee is actually looking at these things. So we'll talk to Rep. Johanson about that, and particularly some of you to how you can do this and get in a testimony. Because I think as we get down to the short end of the session, which is upon us, the quicker you input, the better, and the more it is yours rather than a cut and paste, the better as well. So we'll give you an idea how to do that. In the meantime, those of you that are sending me email, I can't even answer. I can't even look at them in this segment, and I know you're so used to it. But the only way you can join us for this is by picking up the telephone and calling. And don't ask Raphael off the air for something. You stand up. 296-5467. That's 296-KHNR. It's time. Okay, back in the business of the 2013-14 legislative session. Representative Aaron Johanson in the House. And we're talking about what's happening in the big house downtown. In the next couple of days, every day from this point forward is significant. And before we go to the phones, I got to tell you something. We're talking about, costs going up, and I was relating the story earlier this morning about the closing since 1997 of Sam Troy's Breakfast, Lunch, and Crab over the weekend. And one part of the article said, and I'm staggered at this, is that when they started in 1997, their electric bill was $5,000 a month, which would have choked most of us to death. Now it's $25,000 a month. So if something goes up 5 times and you can't put up the price of a local moco 5 times, you can't stay in business.
Yeah.
And so how many of your constituents are saying, hey, how do we stop this runaway cost of living here?
Okay. Many of them.
Yeah, lots and lots of
respects.
them. Yeah. Okay, let's get to the telephones. 296-KHNR is the number. That's 296-5467. Dennis in Salt Lake has been waiting to speak with us. Good morning, Dennis.
Good morning, Mike, and good morning, Aaron.
Hey, Dennis.
Back to the budget. one of your Senate colleagues advised an audience of his town hall meeting recently that 80% of our $11 billion state budget is there to satisfy employee-related expenses. That's what it's apparently. Our state budget is defined as employee-related expenses. So I think the House is doing the right thing. They're paring back, but we're probably not really getting to the heart of the matter.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're correct, and so is my colleague. A lot of our state budget is driven by employee-related costs, fixed costs. But I think you're also right in that there is some discretion, and I think where there is that room for discretion, when a project might be a nice to have versus a need to have, is when that discretion should be used in a more conservative fashion to ensure that, in the event that someday something goes wrong, we've got a little bit of surplus for the future.
Okay, well, we're putting plenty of money in the pot, and I'm just saying it's all being used in the Human Resources Department, and we should be able to at least get 30 cents on the dollar back.
Yeah,
we're only getting 20.
Yeah.
Well, and to your point, one of the things that the House did is part of where we achieved savings is we did not accede to some of the governor's requests for additional positions or, for certain salary increases. And so, every time on a budget worksheet, you all of a sudden say that instead of Dennis's 5 employees, Dennis gets 10. Well, that those extra 5 employees drive up the cost for the state significantly and for the budget. And so it's incumbent upon us, and when we were in the Finance Committee working on the budget, there were lots of times where we said to the executive departments, I'm sorry, you haven't justified the need for these additional 5 employees, Dennis, so we're not going to concur and we're not going to fund them. But, you have to look at everything in granular detail because it all adds up, and I think when we don't is when all of a sudden you add a ton of employees and then wonder why have the employment costs gone up.
Yeah, Dennis, you bring up a great point. Thanks for contributing to the program. It's appreciated. And one thing that you and I were talking about, Rep. Johanson, off the air was that nationwide we have a tremendous number of or percentage of the population getting some form of government assistance. Mm-hmm. And one thing you said is that that it's unsustainable. It's as simple as that, isn't it? We just, hungry birds in a nest, but if you give them all a worm, worms will get extinct.
Mm-hmm. Especially because everybody makes the mistake of thinking that 100% of the population is paying taxes, but that's not your tax base. Yeah. So, when you have a tax base...
300 million people are paying taxes.
Right, yeah. and that's not the case. So you have a shrinking number of people paying taxes for a growing number of potential entitlements. It's not a realistic or sustainable proposition.
296-5467, that's the number. That's 296-KHNR. And those of you that are trying to get in, the lines are busy with a bunch of regulars, and we'll deal with them swiftly so that we can get some new folks on. But there's one thing that's being publicized a lot lately, and this is one of our regular contributors here in Lanikai, but is the Jones Act. And I do know that there's a lot of move underfoot on both sides of that. Very quickly, Alan, let's see what your side of the story is, and then we'll talk to the representative. Good morning.
Good morning. Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
That's why I introduced you, Alan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, thank you, Representative Johanson, for taking the time to come down. My pet project at this time is to get House Concurrent Resolution 150 passed, because what that is a request that the U.S. Congress exempt one small part of our economy from the Jones Act, so that a company like Matson would be allowed to buy liquid natural gas tankers made in a foreign country. Mm-hmm. And what this can do is radically reduce the cost of energy for Oahu. This is Oahu's big opportunity. Mm-hmm. In other words, it would probably cut the cost of fuel for Hawaiian Electric in half, and by going to natural gas, it would be a major environmental improvement and save Hawaiian Electric from having to put scrubbers on their existing power plants. It is a wonderful opportunity, and in effect, all the concurrent resolution asks for is exactly what happened for the cruise ship Pride of America. Mm-hmm. See, that ship was built in Europe, and if we could have a couple of tankers, perhaps for Matson,
Okay, Alan. Alan, I need to cut you short there, rather than go on with your thought, because I got a lot of people waiting. But I do appreciate it, and I'll ask Aaron to respond to the Jones Act in general, if that's all right.
Well, I think Alan made some points which definitely are echoed in the resolution he cited, and Representative Ward, our Minority Leader Emeritus, has been a great champion for this particular resolution, and actually its support for that resolution has been echoed by a Star Advertiser editorial.
Yeah, and I think that people like Alan wrote a very compelling letter to the editor the other day about this, and it is true. But what seems to be the concern on the other side of the issue is that, well, every time you make a waiver, or every time you create an exemption, you weaken the actual document. Is it time to look at the entire Jones Act, and what do you think about this particular bill? Does it have legs?
Well, this is just a resolution, so it does not. Yeah, it doesn't have any binding effective law, and it would just be asking Congress to do something, because it's a congressional level issue that does bear on us significantly here in Hawaii. And so it wouldn't have any effect of binding law, but lots of potential changes in law start with resolutions, where people can see intent.
To create something. Isn't it true that a lot of resolutions commission studies, and that we have studies backed up in warehouses that are forever full? But in fact, do you personally think that it's time to take a look at something like the Jones Act, which is a very old document, and say, if not getting rid of it, certainly amending it to meet the times is important?
I think it's important to take a look at everything that we've had on the books for a long time that hasn't been examined, just to make sure it's meeting our needs in the modern context, because sometimes times change, sometimes things need to stay the same, sometimes they need to be revised.
It's been said that there are very few places in the United States anymore, because of economic changes and everything else, that even have the ability to make the ships that we need to transport the goods that we need to transport. Interesting. All right. Where does that sit? Will there be? Is there more debate on this resolution?
There's still some more time.
Is it tomorrow? Isn't it tomorrow or something, or soon?
No, I think because resolutions don't necessarily need to be passed in the same time frame as bills, the focus for most committees has been on bills. So
okay. Representative Aaron Johanson is the House. Still to come up, more of your phone calls, including also taking a look at what's happening tomorrow. The remaining 3 early learning bills and their importance in the big picture, which is something we're trying to all get a hold of. Man Alive at 7:45. I don't want to say that the legislature's like the disco duck. However, they do some strange dancing down there. And before we get back to your phone calls, Representative Aaron Johanson's in the House. I know that there's a couple of very important things coming up in the next couple of days, and there are 3 remaining early learning bills, and I know that a great deal of public empathy and sympathy and agreement is, because whenever you start talking about kids, everybody, the kids, it's all for the kids. This represents a whole new wave of spending, however.
It does.
And so,
particularly in the future years.
Yeah,
not
and
so
so
much
how,
in the initial year.
It's not to say that this stuff isn't necessary, but how timely is it, and what do you think its chances are at the moment?
Well, there's certainly a lot of impetus for it. I mean, I think preparation for children to ensure that they have educational opportunity, and good opportunities in the future is important. I think where the House and the Senate differ is the Senate has more fully embraced the governor's ideas than the House. I think the House has taken a step back and been a little bit more cautious about it, which is why in the Finance Committee we didn't put any money for it in the future, because we wanted to see the idea teased out and fleshed out more. I think there are many in the House.
Well, this is at your committee, the Finance Committee, tomorrow. Again.
So we'll see, but I think there are many in the House that have certain. It's interesting. This bill has different detractors, but for various reasons. These early learning bills. Some people really don't like it because they're opposed to any form of a voucher, and this would in some way, shape, or form be a voucher. Yeah. So you have some people who are against it for that reason. You have some other people who feel like, we already have the preschool open doors program that's already funded. So why create a whole new vestige of government and a whole additional entity when really you could just expand a program that's already there. And you have the more politically astute people who might feel like there's, clearly we're going into 2014, and I, having served in the executive branch, realize that most chief executives want to have a few wins that they can talk about when they have to stump again.
Yep.
About all the things that they've done.
Unfortunately, we talked about that briefly earlier. That is all too prevalent rather in some bills, because they seem to be creating some stars that need some help in their as they're running. It's ironic though, and I don't know if this is going to come up at all in the discussions, but some may have seen the list of the other day of the increased cost in private schools, where it's gone up again to the tune of 3, 4, 5%. But now some of these schools are like $20,000 a year. That's a lot of money. These are after-tax dollars.
It is. It is when you think about it. That some of the most, at least when I was in college, some of the most expensive private schools were $40,000 a year. So to be paying half that for primary and secondary education is really expensive. I think
isn't it though a testament, or not a testament, but a highlighting of some parents' feelings that, look, who wants to spend $20,000 a year if they could get it from the public school system? What would their lives be different? And how far away are we to be able to give a child that certainly has the same amount of money being spent on them? Why can't we create the same level of education?
And I think to be honest, depending on where you are, what school you are.
Some of them are great, by the way.
Some of them are terrific, and how engaged.
Aren't you a
the
case in
community.
point?
I wasn't going to whip out the Moana Lua card.
No,
but you gave me
but honestly, there are
to it.
there are a bunch of schools that, despite other places, have a magic mix of parents, of students, and of educators, teachers that are great teachers that provide opportunity to be a superstar.
And I have to say, some great administrators too. They're often left out, but one of the reasons that Moana Lua complex and many of the complexes I represent have had such great successes is because they have great leaders, both in the classroom and outside the classroom. I think with the early learning bills, though, what time will tell is I don't feel, and many of my colleagues in the House don't feel like they've gotten a great answer as to why not just expand an existing program. If the necessity is what you say it is, why build completely new infrastructure just to accommodate something that probably can already be done through an existing program?
Okay, Rep. Aaron Johanson is in the house. We're good? Okay. Let's go to the
always good, Mike.
No, I was talking to Raphael, not you and I, whether or not I had to take another break before the top of the hour, and the answer is no. Don in Kaneohe has been waiting a long time. He's our regular buddy, particularly with things that have to do with ADA and with disabled. As you know, he's blind and yet can see a lot more than some of us can see. Don, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I'll make it very quick and brief, but Representative Johanson, I belong to the Hawaii Statewide Independent Living Council. Just was approved by Governor Abercrombie in November of last year. I'm very concerned about situation with ADA concerning how much money is allocated by the state or maybe by the federal to comply with ADA guidelines. Concerning my issue is when the city builds a bus stop on, say, Kamehameha Highway, and there's no access way after for a person in a wheelchair or a person who was blind because of the road is so narrow. What monies are set aside for making infrastructures for access way for somebody who's disabled and wants to be independent to be able to go out and use the bus and to travel and to go to work or go to whatever, a doctor's appointment?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Don, and I think that's one of the primary missions of DCAB, or the Disability Communication Access Board.
Right.
And what they typically, as you well know, but some of the listeners may not, is they have a nexus with the development of infrastructure, particularly public infrastructure, and making sure that there's ADA compliance and access. And typically they will come to the legislature and continue to ask for different appropriations, or they do have a fee. I'm not sure if it's still alive. I know they were seeking a $1 increase that would have been pegged to the vehicle registration fee, which would have given them additional means to better do their job. And so there are state entities tasked with ensuring that compliance. The degree to which they're able to do so sometimes is a fiscal constraint issue. At least I think they would say that, in a personnel issue. But I know they're trying, and I think your point is well taken, particularly for anyone who has a disability, or particularly as we face this increasing silver tsunami, people may not be in a wheelchair, but they certainly might be having a difficult time walking with their cane or with their walker.
Sure.
And, we need to make sure that our infrastructure is accessible to an aging and disabled population.
Yeah, we do work with DCAP, so I'm going to be really working closely with them.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Thanks
Don,
a lot.
as usual,
Take
thanks
care,
for
Don.
bringing that up. That's a great point. And doesn't it make your heart warm when you see somebody that's obviously living with some challenges to go out and continue to have pretty much a normal life. Yeah. James in Kalihi is next. James, good morning. Thank you for holding. Welcome.
Thank you. I wonder if you could tell me where the red light camera situation is right now.
Sure, I can.
I call that the Joe Suki bill. Is that still alive? That's a great one, James.
He has proposed that. This is actually a Senate bill, so this one can't be completely attributed to him.
Yeah.
The bill is actually alive, and it's going to be heard tomorrow, I believe. It's Senate Bill 693, and it's still limited to certain areas. So there are 2 cameras in Eva Beach. I think there are 2 in town, and 1 in Lahaina, Maui. And so it's limited in scope.
Somebody went off the air. I don't usually take this. What's the bill number again?
SB 693.
Yeah.
And so it's still alive. It's limited in scope which is good for people who are have some concerns a little bit about Big Brother and mission creep. But I think these particular areas, not everyone in these areas has asked for them, but the proponents of the measure have said that typically these are the most dangerous intersections that have the highest incidences of running red lights and traffic accidents.
James, just out of curiosity, not to see what prompted your call, but what are your thoughts on this?
Well, if it were to go widespread, it would be terrible because through no fault of your own, you can get stuck in intersections, and there's not enough left turn lights, so left turn signals. So it would really jam things up, I think. I just don't think it's a very good idea.
Okay, thanks very much.
I did misspeak a little.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm sorry, James, I misspoke. It's actually passed all of its committees, so it continues to move even more than what
So
I just said.
SB 693,
Correct.
Much to the chagrin probably of James, is
Continuing.
right. Okay, now let's talk about that because we only have a couple minutes left. I want people that want to participate to know how important it is, particularly in some of these things that are, like waffling back and forth and more likely to pass or not, depending on what gets said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and it's true. And, sometimes you never know until it's finally done. And people don't understand how important conference is because it's not really talked about in the media. But just because some incarnation of a bill has moved past the Senate and the House, it doesn't mean that the House and the Senate will ultimately reconcile things. And if people continue to keep the pressure up on something particularly that they oppose or support one way or another, that helps it eke out of conference committees sometimes.
It's been said that
the devil's in the details.
I was going to say that the devil's in the details at the end. But it's also been said that we seem to be having some pretty good traction and some pretty good stuff happening in this session. Is that your opinion? I mean,
yes,
we had prior to the election sort of a slow year because nobody wants to come out and say, but now, even though some are already visibly campaigning, that this is a non-election year, really.
Well, I think there are some really good things and again, really good first fruits of some of the things going on in the House, both with respect to the coalition. I don't think it's a coincidence that there's a far more fiscally conservative budget that emanated from the House. We also have, for the first time in a long time, broad-based income tax relief, a bill that's actually moving. This was talked about last week in the Star Advertiser, which would give broad-based income tax relief to lower, middle, and high-income earners, including small businesses. Some of the things that are actually emanating out of the legislature are actually good policy. It's not just it's less bad than it was before.
What a concept, having something come out of a session that's good.
Come out of the House.
Representative Aaron Johanson from the Minority Party, thank you so much for joining us and continued success. And let's hope that next week we have some more good news for everybody.